Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It is time. Evil Dead Burn has released, and it is time to talk about every single Evil Dead movie and rank them from the worst to the best. I want to apologize really quickly if you hear any noises in the background. I'm currently dog sitting, and the dogs are a little bit rowdy this morning, so if you hear pitter-pattering on the floor or anything, that's them just walking around. Maybe a couple of cuts for me to deal with them, but for the most part, it should be okay. So, it is time to rank every Evil Dead movie. If you all don't know, I am on a journey to watch every movie in 2026. Evil Dead Burn is the newest Evil Dead film released just this weekend, and it was very good, so I'm excited to talk about it. And Evil Dead is probably the hardest franchise for me to rank because I love every single one of these movies for different reasons. I don't think any of them are particularly bad, but there are a few that I do think are better than other ones. Also, before I get into it, I want to say that I'm more of a fan of the horror side of the Evil Dead franchise. I've never been super sold on any of the more comedy ones. I don't think they're bad by any means, but I didn't grow up on them or anything, so I have a little bit of a bias skewed towards the more horror entries than I do the comedy ones. That being said, there are 6 Evil Dead movies, and it is time to talk about the 6 of them, so let's jump right into it. Coming in at number 6 is going to be The Evil Dead from 1981. I think the original Evil Dead is still a solid movie, and it is the one that obviously started the entire thing, but I think compared to every other Evil Dead movie, it's so far disconnected from the style of the original 3, or the other 2 movies in the original trilogy of Evil Dead movies, and it's also stylistically not very similar to any of the more horror-coded entries. It's this weird middle ground of the story didn't really have its own identity yet. They didn't really know what they wanted to do with this world and with these characters, and it definitely feels a little bit weaker and less focused than the other ones. I think there's still a lot of good ideas. Obviously, Bruce Campbell is still great in this movie, as he is in every other one. But I don't think this is necessarily the greatest, most life-changing movie of all time. The makeup and practical effects do look very good. But other than that, it's very hard to praise a lot of this movie, especially on a script level, because it is the beginning. Obviously, Sam Raimi, this is his first big breakout film, so you're dealing with a lot of the growing pains of being a new director as well. And obviously, like I said, Bruce Campbell's really the only person in this cast that's able to carry a scene and do a lot of heavy lifting. And because the series didn't have an identity yet, he's more of just a flat, static character that's kind of dealing with the repercussions of things going on. So it's definitely my least favorite of the franchise, but it's not in any way a bad movie. It's like a 7 out of 10 for me. I know a lot of other people would say maybe an 8 out of 10, but I think it's just a perfectly fine film. Coming in at number 5 is going to be Lee Cronin's Evil Dead Rise. This is a movie that I look back at quite fondly, but I don't think is necessarily my favorite of the franchise, and is definitely not my favorite of the more horror-coded ones. Evil Dead Rise, like I said, is directed by Lee Cronin. I think Lee Cronin's eye for the camera is a little too maybe obsessive with CGI, and not in a way that's something I'll talk about when we get to Evil Dead Burn, but he has a lot of sequences that are really well shot and look really good and very horror coded, but they use CGI in a way that doesn't really compel the scene as interesting as if it would have just been regular practical work. And maybe that could have also been a studio choice instead of his choice. I'm not sure, but I felt the same way about The Mummy earlier this year, which I know I didn't do a video on that one, but I've felt very similar about Lee Cronin's The Mummy as I do to Evil Dead Rise, where there's a lot of choices that they make with using CGI here instead of practical effects here, and there's a lot of choices that they make with how this visual is going to look and how this visual is going to look that very similar in both of those movies. I think was just kind of a missed opportunity to do something that looks a little bit different and would have been more visually interesting. Evil Dead Rise also has a very claustrophobic feel to it. It's very tight corners in this apartment building. It is a good movie. It is a very great horror film, in my opinion. It's very fun. I don't think there's really anything bad about this movie, except maybe it's a little too maybe the characters aren't quite as interesting, I don't think, as the other movies. I think this is one has probably my least favorite cast of characters. But it's a solid movie. I think obviously the standout performance is the main, like, the mom character. I'm trying to find, I think it's Alyssa Sutherland is her name. She's fantastic. She's literally incredible in this movie. The way that she can contort her body and, like, do these different, like, motions is creepy. It's so well done. And really the only thing I don't like about this movie is that Lee Cronin just chooses to do a lot of things with CGI that don't really work. It's not bad. It's not, there's nothing really wrong with it. It's just a few minor nitpicks really hold it back for me. Still think it's a solid movie, though. All right, at number 4, and this is probably going to be my big hot take on this list because everyone says this is like the best movie of all time. But for me, this is going to be Evil Dead 2 at number 4. As I said at the beginning of the video, I'm just not quite as keen on the comedy side of this franchise. I feel like the comedy is very hit or miss. It's kind of a stoner comedy in that way where, like, there's a lot of jokes that I think land and then a lot of jokes that don't. I still think this is a 8 out of 10 movie. I think there are a ton of ideas here that land every single time I watch it. But similar to like not in the same, like, stupid way as, like, Pizza movie earlier this year, but just in that same, like, vein of stoner comedy. I feel like Evil Dead 2 requires this very different mindset to watch, especially coming off of the first one, because I watched this whole trilogy in one kind of a binge. It's just such a big tonal whiplash. And it's not a bad tonal whiplash. I think that Evil Dead 2 is where the franchise finally finds its identity and is really able to kind of roll with it into the third film. But there are just a few structural things with the comedy that don't really work for me. Like, for example, you have the cast of characters. Ash is kind of doing his own thing, is kind of like the sequel to the original, whereas these new group of characters are coming in from out of town to investigate. And I feel like the way that the dynamics mesh with these characters doesn't really work for me, and it's not quite as interesting as if they would have had maybe a full-on tonal reset where they kind of set that up that it was going to be a reset after, the first movie. But here instead it's kind of its own thing, like its own movie that doesn't necessarily need the first movie to act as a sequel, but like it still uses ideas. It's a very confusing choice. I don't really know why they did that, but there's a lot of things to love. It's a great comedy movie. If you love comedies, especially if you grew up on this movie, I could see that this is by far your favorite in the franchise. I just didn't personally attach with it. I think it's a very good movie, and I totally give this an 8 out of 10, but it's just not really my favorite. Coming in at number 3 is going to be the sequel of Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness. This was definitely my favorite of the original trilogy because it's so different and it's so stupid and it's so silly. And I just had an absolute blast with this movie. Once again, still don't think this is like a perfect movie. This is still like an 8 out of 10 solid film. But I love a lot of what they do here. Ash feels like such a character in this movie, whereas the first movie, he was very bland, very generic. And in the second movie, a lot of what he does is dictated by the way that the demons are kind of forcing him to respond. But here in Army of Darkness, he is the lead character. He is making choices. He is doing things that are pushing the narrative forward. And Bruce Campbell is finally found his, momentum with the character here. And it makes me excited because I haven't seen the Ash vs. Evil Dead TV series. It makes me very excited to jump into that show coming off of this movie and especially the last, my top 2 movies, because I feel like the show is going to be a combination of the horror elements of the 2 that I like the most with the comedy elements that Bruce Campbell's able to bring to this character of Ash in Army of Darkness. And there's just so many lines in this movie, so many moments in this movie that are iconic and quotable. It's the first movie that has an actual, villain character instead of just being demons are the villain. And I really like that. It works really well for this movie. And I don't know, I really love Army of Darkness. It sells me on everything from the practical effect work to the silly claymation skeletons to the castles and the medieval architecture. And the way that Ash carries a shotgun in the 1200s, it all adds up together to make this very silly, to paint this very silly, very outlandish picture that Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell are very elegantly able to bring to the screen. I really like Army of Darkness. It sold me on the original trilogy, whereas I didn't love the original and didn't, fall in love, but could see the good things about Evil Dead 2. I really liked Army of Darkness. Now, coming in at number 2 is going to be a movie that I actually am going to rewatch very soon because I remember loving this movie, and I still think I do like it better than the original trilogy, but I need to rewatch it to get truly my full, better thoughts on everything that I do love, and that is going to be Evil Dead 2013. This is kind of the soft reboot / remake of the original. This movie is awesome, and it's just awesome. It's so bloody and gory, and the practical effect work is fantastic. It flows so well. The characters are memorable. I love every single one of them. Even the guy that I absolutely hate that causes the whole event is memorable just because he, is such an idiot. And I don't know, I really love a lot of what they do with this movie. I think it works so well as a reboot because you go into this movie expecting it to be the comedy, because that's what Evil Dead has been kind of known for up to this point, and instead you get this blood-soaked gore fest that has so many big scares with the Deadites and so many big, kind of epic moments, I want to say, just moments that feel like they would be out of a comic book movie instead of out of a horror movie, and it builds this world that I'm very interested in watching play out. And since, they planned on doing kind of a trilogy off of this movie, which I guess kind of got ruined with COVID and changes in hands and producers and stuff like that. But this movie just stands out to me as such a great horror movie, let alone a great Evil Dead movie. I really love everything that they did with Evil Dead 2013. It is a solid horror movie. I cannot wait to rewatch this movie so that I can gloat about it more when I kind of talk about Evil Dead Burn in the 2026 full ranking video. But this movie's fantastic. One of my favorite horror films. Love this movie. And then coming in at number 1, call this recency bias if you want. That's fine. Call me crazy for putting it up this high. But man, Evil Dead Burn, this new movie, genuinely blew me away. Before I walked into this movie, I was talking and I said that the trailer didn't really sell me on any of the ideas they were going for, and what I'm going to expect from the reviews is that this is going to be a solid movie that I'm going to like, but it's not going to be anywhere near the top of my Evil Dead ranked, or really even the top of my 2026 ranked. And I was maybe halfway through the movie, or actually, for starters, I was in, the first 10 minutes of the movie after the intro when the title card played, and I was still not really sold on a lot of the ideas. I liked the title card. I liked kind of the last few minutes of that first 10 minutes, but I was like, this movie shot really weird. It's shot very, claustrophobic. It's shot very quick and fast-paced, and it just feels a little disorienting. Maybe I'm not going to be able to keep up with this movie, so I'm really worried that a lot of the ideas aren't going to work for me. And then, 10 more minutes pass by, and then 20 minutes, and then 30 minutes. And then before I know it, I'm, 3/4 into the movie, and I'm like, oh my God, this movie is incredible. This is awesome. I am shocked with how much I'm loving this movie. And then I get to the end of the movie, and I only really, by the end, had one issue with it. I had one problem with this movie. And I was like, this movie was so good. There was only one thing that I didn't like. And that one thing I didn't like is kind of the same issue I had with Evil Dead Rise, except it's very minuscule in this movie because it's barely even an issue, and it's CGI. And that's it. There's so much practical effect work in the first, hour and 40 minutes, and then in the last 10 minutes, they bring in one villain character that's all CGI, and it doesn't look like the worst thing I've ever seen, but it's definitely not, incredible. It's just kind of, not great. But he's barely even, in all of the shots, and when he is, they do a good job concealing him so they don't have to spend a lot of money on the CGI and stuff. And that worked for me because the CGI kind of annoyed me, so it worked out. And other than the CGI, I thought, man, what do I not like about this movie? Because even the shots in the trailer that I thought looked really bad, like the I didn't, when the first teaser trailer came out and it was kind of that long one take of like the crazy action going on behind the main character, she's trying to escape, I thought that looked cheap. I thought it looked bad. And then I actually watched the movie and it's shot in a completely different style. The color grading is completely different. And it's like I'm watching a completely different movie than what the trailers tried to sell me on. And I loved every second of it. Evil Dead Burn literally has been one of the biggest shocks for me of not only the entire year, but by far of this entire franchise. Because going into, the original Evil Dead, I was expecting this would be an okay movie. It's probably going to have some growing pains of being the beginning of a franchise, but it'll be solid. Then I went into Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness. I was like, I know these are going to be really silly, but I think I'm going to have a good time. And then Evil Dead Rise, I didn't really have any pre-connotations. I kind of just let it slide. 2013, I didn't think was going to be very good because I hadn't heard really anybody talk about it. And then I watched it. I was like, whoa, this movie's really good. And then I did my research, and people do actually love that movie. And Evil Dead Burn, I went into thinking, wow, I'm not going to like this. And it just completely blew me away. This movie is awesome. The characters are memorable. The action is memorable. The gore is memorable. The sequences are memorable. Some of the best horror sequences that I've seen in probably the last 10 years are in this movie. There are so many moments that are done in one shot, and the camera moves so quickly between characters and between sequences, and it just feels so flowy and so fluid. I literally want to go watch this movie again. I loved this movie so much that I walked out of the theater and said, fuck, I want to go see this movie again. This movie is awesome. If you love horror movies and you're not going to go see Evil Dead Burn, you are missing out because this movie is awesome. From every single moment, from literally as soon as the title card plays until this movie is over, I was engaged. I was locked in. It was probably the fastest 2 hours of my life. Evil Dead Burn is fantastic. I'm putting it at the top of the list. I know it's going to get so many people who are going to talk about it and say this is a terrible opinion. I don't even care. I absolutely loved this movie. And yeah, that's all I have to say. The Evil Dead franchise is probably the most consistent horror franchise of all time. Definitely right there next to Scream, which I think has 6 good movies and one that's okay, 2 kind of not good. But Evil Dead is a fantastic franchise. If you haven't seen all 6 of these movies, I definitely recommend you do because they're all really good. And maybe, obviously, a lot of people are going to disagree with my opinion because a lot of people hold those comedy entries a lot closer to their heart. A lot of people say Evil Dead 2 is the best in the franchise, and I totally understand that. Like I said, I think all of these movies are really good. I'm just an easier sell on the more horror-oriented entries, so if you're not a big fan of the horror stuff, I totally understand why you wouldn't get it, but me personally, I love Evil Dead Burn, and I really liked the 2013 reboot, but to each their own with this franchise. All of them are fantastic. I think all of them are 8 out of 10s except the original, which is a 7 out of 10. And yeah, that's going to do it for me. There you go. That's my opinions on Evil Dead Burn. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace out.